Hello, and welcome to this Excel walkthrough of how to change a normal bar graph to a mirror bar graph or a mirror histogram. Now you'll notice here that the student has a table that has count ifs. They've tabbed each of these up, and you'll notice there are 19 total respondents here. Now, for a mirror diagram or a mirror bar graph to be depicted properly in Excel, we have to have negative values. That's part of those graphs. In this case, we don't have any negative values, but we have data that is negative in nature. So what I mean there is very valuable and valuable are more positive than unknown and somewhat valuable on a scale of positive words to negative words. In this case, we would, if we're going to do a mirror histogram, mirror bar graph, however you want to say it, we would keep very valuable and valuable as positive, but we would need to change our unknown and somewhat valuable to negative numbers. Now, there's multiple ways to do this. When I first shot this video, I was worried about corrupting the original data, so I copied and pasted it over to the side. And then I modified the unknown and somewhat valuable by hand with negatives and created a new graph. Nothing wrong with that, especially if you know your data's not going to change. Might as well do that. It allows you to see the data in both forms as well because it's applicable in both forms. Um, in this case, sometimes a student might need to update their work later on. They don't have all their data in, and I wanted to make sure those students were helped as well. So rather than copying it over, because when you copy it over, you lose the count if. You lose the formula that gives you those numbers. It just grabs those numbers as they are. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to modify each of these count ifs with the negative. Now you may be wondering why I'm modifying a 0 there with negative. It's not because we can make 0 negative. We can't. 0 is the central line. It is because if for some reason the student's data changes, we know everything in the unknown column needs to be negative on our mirror diagram. So we come in here and we put a negative in front of all of those numbers. Now you're just going to see me continue this for this column. And then again for the somewhat valuable column as well. We're just going to stick a negative between the equal sign and the countif for everything in that column. And there you go. You can see now that everything in the somewhat valuable and unknown column is negative. And look at how that modified the student's graph. Half of our data is missing. Don't worry about that. I do want to draw your attention over here to the total. Remember that our total was for each of these 19 respondents, and suddenly we lost our check system. So that's one of the downsides of putting it here. Now, notice that the student used the sum, that automatically sum between those cells, and that works. So if we still want to make sure we have our count correct, we're just going to come in here and rather than doing the auto sum formula, where it's just equal sum and then you put, this cell through this cell, we are instead going to be just summing it out in a slightly different way. Now we know very valuable and valuable are going to be positive or 0, depending on how the data changes. So we are going to just leave them as they are and add them as they are. But our unknown and somewhat valuable columns are negative or 0, and we want to make sure we offset that. In this scenario, we're going to use ABS for absolute value. Absolute value is the distance from 0. And so if we put the absolute value, it's going to make that number positive. So we have absolute value of this cell plus, oops, hit the wrong thing there. You do have to make sure you open a parentheses after the ABS of the cell plus the absolute value of the cell. Open that parentheses here. And now you'll see for this row, we got that check, 19 respondents. Then what do you know? And we're just going to go through and replace each of these formulas because our data has changed. We want our check system in place. Now, I will let you know, the total here is actually not going to be in your table. You don't depict that. If you actually highlight the total there when you go to make your histogram or boundary graph, the Excel will actually treat it like it is a whole new category. So you don't have to do this bit if you don't want to. If you know you have that check in place in some other way, because there's more than one way to do this. There's often more than one way to do things in math and Excel. That's perfectly fine. So I'm just going to continue doing the absolute value plus the absolute value. And you're going to see me go ahead and do this for each of these Now I'm going to go ahead and show you one more time this cell plus this cell plus the absolute value of this cell plus the absolute value of this cell should be 19 and check. There you go. So as you can see, I have all of the totals are now 19, and I did that by adding up the two positive values to the absolute value of the two negative values. Check, all 19 respondents are accounted for. Now we want to redo this diagram. Take that off. I'm going to go ahead and highlight our table. Please do not highlight the total. It will add a whole new category, and that's not something that we want. And then we're going to, since the student originally had this in columns, I'm going to go ahead and put it in columns as well. And then there you go. That looks better. And so you'll notice there's a little bit of formatting that we're probably going to want to change. We can go ahead and change our chart title so that way the reader of our work knows what we're trying to depict. We can come over here to our horizontal axis, and we're going to go ahead and go down to label position. Notice right now it's next to the axis, and our bars are obscuring it. We can put it above, or we could put it below. It does not matter. I think below works, and that's what the student originally had, so I'm going to leave it there. And at this point, we can end our table here if we wanted to. Now, if we wanted to show the reader of our work in a little bit more detail, we can come over here and put the data labels on. So as you see there, I click each of these categories and I turn the data labels on. Now notice the data labels are going to depict this data down below the axis as negative because we made it negative to put it down below the axis. That's okay. You can explain that to the reader of your work why that is negative, and that is because we are dealing with not necessarily that our tally was negative, but we have on a scale of positive to negative in like feeling very valuable, feels a lot more positive than somewhat valuable. All right, well, there you have it. There is a detailed mirror histogram or bar graph, whatever you want to call it, for depicting your data. Thank you so much for your time.